I'm Charles Galdi, your host for The Church in Action. Welcome to part 2 of Vision New England's foundation and legacy in the Macchia Years.
The major thing I think we had an impact on was Alpha. Mm-hmm. We had heard of Alpha because we took the course on tape, but also our daughter and her husband were stationed in England and took it in London when they were there. Mm-hmm. And we did a showing here for people where we showed the same film a couple of nights. And the minute Elizabeth Elliot said this was good stuff, we knew we were a little bit out of trouble. So that led us to really lobby with Steve. You've got to get this guy over here because it's quite a movement. And Steve was persuaded.
Nicky Gumbel.
Yeah. Come over and do a workshop. But then what happened? One of your major speakers, I think it might have been Margaret Jensen, dropped out. One of the major speakers. So all of a sudden, Nicky Gumbel was on the major platform.
Oh, wow.
So Alpha in its impact. And that was the beginning of the spread of Alpha in New England. And particularly, Bonny was very involved because of Network News in their first major U.S. conference at Gordon College. In what year was it? 2000.
I think it was 2000 or 2001. I think
2001. And from there, bingo.
Where Nicky Gumbel came over.
Thank you, Steve, for caving in.
And he turned out to be the speaker people were really impacted by. And so Congress played a huge part. Vision New England played a huge part in helping to start that. And it couldn't be more in line with your mission, of course, the evangelism and growth. So,
God has a plan.
Yeah, it was definitely.
Steve, go ahead.
I would say the Alpha story is one of probably hundreds of stories that exposure was given through either a workshop or an exhibit or a speaking opportunity and all sorts of ministries. I mean, people would tell us that they've now planned their whole year of small groups as a result of going to a particular workshop and hearing about a specific resource. Yeah. Or they would connect with others that were in New England that were doing the same kind of ministry at a workshop. Like we'd have Scott and Hannah Larson who were doing troubled youth ministries with Vision New England, and they would do workshops, and then their ministry spun off Straight Ahead Ministries, and that thing is continuing to mushroom today, nationally for sure, and maybe even internationally. And I can tell you, story after story after story of ministries like the Alpha story that had their entree via Congress. Yeah. And we got to remember that Congress was more than the several thousand people sitting in the big auditorium. There was networking going on. There were meals. There were smaller venues of worship. There was the Saturday night venue for youth that we added. And then we had the massive exhibit hall that had hundreds of ministries and nonprofit organizations there. So if people needed help with a fundraising campaign, or they were looking for Sunday school material, or they were looking to see if there was a place in Bermuda that was accessible to Christians having a retreat in a beautiful place like that, all of which they found in our exhibit hall. And the exhibit hall became kind of a competitive place because people would come after us to say, I want a better placement. I want to be on the end. I want to be on a particular corner. I want to be where the most traffic is coming and going. And we'd have to, fit and fashion the exhibit hall to accommodate their needs, but also our own needs. And that was a major part of the financial resource for Congress, was that we were charging for those tables, especially for larger organizations. They became major funding sources for sustaining Congress year after year. When I started at Vision New England in '89, there were about 4,000 in attendance at the annual Congress. our goal, and Andrew Accardi worked for us for several years. He and I we keep setting the next big goal, and the big one that we had was 10,000. We want to reach 10,000. We just about killed ourselves off doing so, but we hit the 10,000 mark at about the year 2000-ish.
Mhm.
And it was just amazing to see the growth of Congress, the expansion of Congress, the reputation of Congress all over New England, but really all across the country.
Mhm.
A lot happened in a window of time, namely a weekend, that had ripple effects in individual lives, church lives, denominations, ministries, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's uncountable, the numbers of positive ripple effects that came from Congress. And I would say the Alpha story is one of the more spectacular, but there are many, many others as well.
And I know that when I first got involved in Vision New England back in 2017, 2018, I'm traveling around with Clive Calver, asking people, do they want to be part of a rebirthing at that point, and what would that look like? At least a third of the people talk to us about Congress and how much they miss Congress and how much they grieve the absence of Congress. So it was a transformative and formative event for so many people in New England. And now, Steve, I want to come back to Congress, but I want to pause for a second, because at some point in this window, EANE is not EANE anymore, the Evangelistic Association of New England. It is VNE, Vision New England. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was quite the process. Caleb, were you on the board during that time when we changed it?
I was, and I remember we were shocked that no one else had taken that acronym.
Yeah.
Vision New England.
It was a great name. We had a vision for New England. We were in New England, and we wanted to think of future. We wanted to promote future. Where are we going? What is this becoming? How is the body of Christ being united and motivated to serve our region for Jesus Christ? And frankly, the Evangelistic Association of New England was too difficult for people to remember. I would go and speak at churches, Charles, and I'd be introduced, and the person would have the piece of paper in front of them that said the Evangelistic Association of New England, and 90% of the time I was not correctly introduced. It was the Evangelical Association, or
people
it's just
started calling it ENE.
Yes.
You remember that ENE? I thought, then that's it. No.
Right, because we tried to simplify. We tried to codify the EANE and see if that would work. But exactly right. Bonnie's right. People started calling it ENE. And I was like, oh, no, we don't want that. That's not. So we did go through a process, a discernment process, and we ended up with the name Vision New England. And I would say 90% of the people loved it. The people who had the hardest time with it were the dear saints who had been a part of EANE for so many years, that to let go of the name was like letting go of the mission. Yeah. And I kept having to communicate, no, we're going to propel the mission. And Charles, I can tell you that when we made that single decision to change our name, the trajectory, the J curve, we started going up the other side of the J curve.
Wow.
In every possible way.
Now, just so you know, I know you'll appreciate this. About once a month, I'll get some email from someone wanting to sell me lists of optometrists in New England.
For Vision New England, yes, I get it. We knew that was going to be a possible problem as well. Yeah.
Well, it's hardly. I just delete them. That's all. It's not a big problem for me.
Right.
And so now, when is that happening? When does the name change happen?
I want to say early 90s.
Okay. So relatively early on.
Mid 90s, because we were going through a process of discernment regarding the organization at the same time that I was working on my doctoral program with Church Health. And we took the questions to the people at Congress 2 years in a row to help describe their church. What's the state, what's the health of their church? So you talk about another ripple effect. Vision New England was at the centerpiece of the wider church moving from church growth to church health. And I determined at that point we needed to write our story, because people were stealing the 10 traits of a healthy church that we had come up with as an organization through the research that we had done about the church at Congress. And so I think it was during all of that conversation that we also were changing the name of the organization. At that point, we were moving to Acton. That was a growth curve for us. We had never raised that kind of money before. We had never had our own standalone facility because we were in condo in Burlington, and we were a part of Tremont Temple, downtown Boston, for years. Probably I believe all the years of EA&E, which by the time I showed up, we had already hit our 100th year. Yeah. So here we were changing the name of a 100-year-old New England organization. No small task. No small task.
Now, Steve, what's one of your fondest memories?
Oh, Charles, I have thousands of them. I mean, I loved Congress, but you know what? I loved our other ministries as well. During that time, we had the most comprehensive prison ministry in the country. The reason why Chuck Colson was interested in us is because we preceded him. And all the prison ministry work that he had done, he knew Don Moberger and Lenny Spitali and some of our key team members. They were associated with the Colson Prison Fellowship ministry. And Prison Fellowship ended up totally engulfing us, and they were bigger and wider and more well-known because of Chuck's name and Prison Fellowship. But I will say that through humble servants, most of whom were previously incarcerated, came to a living faith in Jesus Christ, and they were on our team. So that I can remember a guy, Al Lamore, for example, or Lenny Spitali. Lenny Spitali was the only person that was, what's the word? It was if he never committed his crime. What's that?
Pardoned.
Yeah, he was pardoned in the state of New Hampshire, as if his crime had never been committed, because he was doing so much for the prison system of New Hampshire. So prison ministries, I was delighted to get to know and to be a part of. Troubled Youth Ministry was big, and Scott and Hannah Larson were doing all of that. We started Family Builders Ministries with Willie Batson and his team. We started the disabled ministry, the deaf ministry. Again, we were providing areas of specialty and ministry that no single church could handle on their own. So we became the resource people for smaller churches that wanted to know, how do we deal with the deaf in our community? How do we deal with our troubled youth? How do we deal with our our disabled community? We got to know Johnny Erickson Tata as well. So she came a handful of times, and we would always meet with her because we had a ministry to the disabled that was for the New England church. So we don't often think back to those parts of us, but that was the day by day, week by week outreach, discipling, training, ministry that happened through our team. Yeah. And so we would delight every time we would gather together as a staff, tell us a story. So Lenny would stand up and talk about things happening in prison, or we'd hear something about the deaf community, or we'd hear something about troubled youth, and it would inspire us to keep going. Yeah. Because we weren't a church, but we were serving the church. It was all about the church.
And some of those partnerships are still in place all these years later. We have a wonderful partnership with Johnny and Friends, and Johnny has actually done a couple of things for us. She's been on our radio show, our podcast. She sent, very early on in my time here, they did a video for one of our conferences that Johnny did it. And she said in the video, Charles Galda was doing something. And I went home to my wife and I said, Johnny Erickson said my name today. It's not going to get any better than that.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, ripple effects. When you think about the ripple effects, it's only eternity will tell us what they were.
That's right, because it's yeast. Every once in a while, we get the glimpses of what God is doing through us, but it's yeast, and we don't see most of it for now.
We don't.
I've always thought of God as, of course, the great networker.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly how he works.
Yeah.
He works through his people, meeting one another and interweaving. And this is how he moves people along, and Christian ministry happens is through networking. And God is the one who's bringing the people together and making these things happen. So I think of him, the great networker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As are the Lorings. The Lorings are amazing networkers.
Wow.
I remember Caleb would always wear on his lapel the Salvation Army crest. He was always for the needy, the impoverished, the addicted, the homeless. And he would talk about, there you go, Salvation Army.
Well, it isn't.
Oh, that's Vision New England. That's Vision New England.
This is Vision New England. But if you notice, if you're mentioning the Salvation, you're right, Salvation Army. We, of course, just love the Army. But Caleb doesn't know, but I went because I knew we were going to be talking about, of course, Vision New England. He would wear from Congress,
the pins. Yes.
The pins. We've got, all these pins. He collects things, which is almost.
How many do you have, Bonnie? I'm so intrigued. I want to see. I'm going to see your collection sometime.
Well, there aren't too many of these. I thought there would be more. I might not have found.
Yes, we had pins.
Here's the theme, and then these, but so this is too helpful to see. But
you would get a commemorative pin if you came to the table and answered questions, and we always had a Congress-related pin. But if I could just say about the Salvation Army, the reason why I'm telling the story is Caleb planted in my heart a love for the Army. So when I left Vision New England and started LTI, and I was invited to serve the Army and do training, and my specialty in terms of soul care work, in the 21 and a half years that I've been in my new ministry seat, I have served in the Army across the country, probably 20 different networks of leadership teams. And every time I go, I think of my friend Caleb Loring, and I tell the story that Caleb introduced me by wearing a pin to what the Army was all about. And his story was always positive about the Army. I will do anything for the Army. I love the Army. And they are so receptive to soul care. It's incredible. But again, a ripple effect that you never know what wearing a pin of an organization showing up at a Vision New England event, what it's going to do for the trajectory of your life. And that's a sweet, sweet part of my current story. In fact, next week I'm going to be in Dallas, Texas, and end of August I was in Seattle, Washington with the Army, with teams, helping them in their spiritual formation, their leadership. All came from this guy right here.
And so I want to just wrap up for folks, Congress, and I have one more question for each of you before we wrap up. And so, Steve, when does Congress end? Is that 2003, 4?
It was a couple years after I left. So I want to say it was like 05, 06, something like that.
And I should make the connection. Our admin at Vision New England got saved at Congress in 2003.
Wow.
So that Congress legacy is still very present in Vision New England. And so I'm just grateful for you guys. But let me ask each one of you one more question as we wind down our time. I'd love to hear from each one of you a story you want to tell that you want people to know, a name that you think it's important, whatever you'd want to share, one more thing. And so, Bonnie, let's start with you.
Well, I loved getting to know Steve Macchia. Honestly, Steve, and I'll tell you why. Well, for many reasons. But Steve's eyes were and are so alive with enthusiasm for Christ and the ministry he was doing. I mean, that just came across so much. Now, you look a little different now, Steve. Steve used to have hair that was quite,
I used to have hair, period. Yeah.
We have to, everyone kids him about it. He doesn't mind, do you? So he looked quite different. but that's okay. He had those same eyes that he has now, and his real caring for everyone, giving them total attention when he spoke to them and would learn about them and their ministry. I mean, we all try to be that way, but Steve is very much that way. So you've been a model to me. Thank you.
That's great. Thank
So
you. Caleb, what about you?
Well, Congress, I'm a business guy and came out of business, was drafted on Vision New England's board. And I was able to rub elbows with a lot of other business people and really learn what it meant to be a business person in the marketplace as a Christian and how to go at that. But I'd also say my discussions with Chuck Colson were very meaningful. And part of that goes back to the fact that Chuck, in his original career, as you know, was a lawyer and eventually put in the Nixon administration. He told the Justice Department what they should charge him for to plead guilty and came out and began prison fellowship. Chuck, because he was an attorney in Boston, also knew my father.
Oh, wow.
His dad was an attorney for Fidelity, and he knew George Bennett. And I have this wonderful vision of Chuck and George at a lunch we had at the King's Grant, surrounding my poor father, giving him the gospel. And that's a moment that's always stuck with
What a great memory.
those two old men going at it. Yeah, it's terrific.
That's great. Thank you. And Steve, one more from you. And then would you also give a plug for what Leadership Transformations does?
Sure. It's hard for me to single out names, but I'll put a little group together because Caleb and Bonny would be in that list for me as well. But I remember having lunch one day with Caleb Loring, Alan Emery Jr., and George Bennett Sr. And I came out of that basically saying to Caleb, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong, and that was me. I was sitting at a table with three giants in the faith. The person I would add to that table would be Joanna Mockler, because in my years at Vision New England, it was those families. And Alan Emery III, is the one who actually recruited me on behalf of the Vision New England board at the time to consider being the president following Don Gill.
Wow.
And I had lunch with, I'll never forget this, had lunch with Alan III at a Brigham's. They don't have those anymore, but it was Brigham's. We had lunch. He presented the idea to me, and I'm like, wow, I just need to pray that God will close this door because I don't see it at all into my future. And as Ruth and I prayed, the door just kept getting opened wider and wider. I don't belong in that club. That club is a very austere, wise, generous, amazing group of godly people. And each of those families have had an incredible ripple effect in our region. We stand on the shoulders of those families.
Yeah.
And those families, Mockler, Loring, Bennett, Emery, just to name a few. But those are four of, in my years, those are four of the big people that were actually quite humble, quite gracious, and quite generous. And they listened to me. They cared about me. They were supportive of the work that we were a part of. To me, they became sort of they were all ready, but they became the scaffolding on which we could build something really great together. And then just teams. We didn't mention that we had a Christian education conference every fall as well, with about 1,200 people in it. That's another part of the Vision New England history. Those events brought people together from all stripes, all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all denominations. And I think it became what it was and stayed what it is because of the rock solid foundation of godly, grace-filled men and women of the Lord that are the unsung heroes of the New England faith community. And I'm eternally grateful.
Yeah. That's Steve, that's a great way to end the Vision New England part of the conversation. And so many of those families are still involved today, and they are a blessing to me just to know. And so I can't imagine working with all of them at the same time. And so that's wonderful. Tell us about Leadership Transformations, because you're doing some really important work where you are.
Thank you. It was about a year before I left Vision New England, where God woke me up with a dream that I needed to follow, and I shared the dream and some of the connecting points of it with Caleb and the board. And over a period of months, we all discerned together that my dream was not for Vision New England; it was for something else. And they blessed and sent me off into this new world of spiritual formation for leaders and teams. It grew during my years at Vision New England. It grew through my own personal receiving of spiritual direction. And what it's become a spiritual formation ministry for leaders and teams. And we come alongside these leadership teams and individuals, and we help them prioritize the care and nurture of their soul. We believe firmly that the soul is the most neglected part of the person, and we're trying to reverse that trend and help leaders prioritize their soul and the formation of the souls of those in their care, in their watch care. So we have three main programs: Abide, which is our certificate in spiritual formation; Emmaus, which is our certificate program in formational leadership; and Sela, which is our certificate program in spiritual direction. We also do work here at Gordon Conwell in the Pierce Center for Disciple Building. And we also travel to other parts of the country and offer our services to other ministries, like I just said, related to the Salvation Army, and literally hundreds of others. We have a podcast called the Discerning Leader Podcast, and we have a weekly newsletter called Pathways. And happy to send that to anyone that's interested. They just need to go to leadershiptransformations.org and sign up for Pathways, and you will be blessed, richly blessed every week with words of encouragement in the care and nurture of your own soul. So thanks for asking. It's a ministry that's another ripple effect. It grew out of Vision New England.
And it's fundamentally important. We've talked so much on the Church in Action about how leaders around New England have come together and say, hey, we're not good at making disciples. In other words, growing people spiritually to be like Jesus, which is exactly what your ministry does. And so we've got such a strategic partnership, and we do everything we can to push people into leadership transformation because God is calling us to the transformation you're trying to help people experience. And so I'm really grateful to you and for how generous you are with your time, because you've given a lot of it to us. And after you left Vision New England, you've given us a lot of your time, and I'm grateful to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me in. It's been a real joy and privilege to get to know you, Charles. You're doing a fabulous job, and I'm delighted with our friendship.
Thanks. I am too. I appreciate that. And Bonnie and Caleb, I'm grateful to all three of you. You all have been so gracious and kind to me, but you've also done so much for the kingdom in New England, and through Vision New England and through all the ways you serve. You are all models for us, and I'm grateful to you.
Me too. Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionnewengland.org and click on Donate, or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.